Hello students, this video is being recorded in the summer of 2020, right after the end of the spring semester and in the midst of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Since we do not yet know for sure what format our classes will take in the fall, and since there's some likelihood that at least some of us, both students and faculty, will have to be away from campus for a time should the mitigation plans prove ineffective, or should compliance with or enforcement of public health guidelines prove impossible, I am preparing a video version of each of my lectures for the class to have it ready if and when it is needed. It's also the case that necessary distancing requirements in the classrooms may make it impossible that the entire class can be in the same room at the same time. In that case, those whose turn it is to stay away from campus may find these video lectures a better option than relying on a live classroom feed via Zoom or some other technology. So if you're watching this video, it means that we are, for reasons of public and personal health, still unable to meet together in a traditional face-to-face classroom format. All the same, I'll continue to do my best to teach you what I know with whatever tools I have at my disposal. Enjoy the lecture. In this lecture, I want to discuss the first of the writing assignments for the semester, and that is your forensic argument brief. You'll find the instructions for the writing assignment on Canvas, and it will give you a detailed step-by-step procedure to use, both to do the research and investigation into a cold case murder, and also for preparing your argument brief. So the forensic argument assignment is focused essentially on proving a factual claim. When we talk about forensic argument, we're talking about argument that relates to matters of justice and injustice, arguments that would typically occur in a courtroom. It's one of the three classical genres or types of rhetoric discussed by Aristotle, along with epideictic and deliberative. So the first of the assignments is going to focus on making a forensic argument. But we have to keep in mind that we're writing an argument brief, and by brief, we mean a comprehensive, full sentence outline of the argument. You do not need to write an essay with complete paragraphs, but you do have to carefully show all the parts of your argument, and you do have to represent all the reasoning in your argument clearly. You do have to use proper and correct outlining form. Each of the argument briefs, so everybody's assignment, will have 4 parts. An introduction, where you present the relevant facts of the case. Your hypothesis, where you propose your theory about the case. The argument, which is the main section, the body of your paper, where you present the evidence in support of your hypothesis. And a conclusion, where you briefly summarize the main points of your argument. So just to give you an example here, here's from a previous semester, a couple of sections from a student's forensic argument brief. You can see that it's constructed as a full sentence outline in outline form and using also footnotes to cite the sources of the evidence the student has consulted. So the main sort of theoretical material that we will use is Cicero's De Inventioni. It's a Latin term meaning on invention. And by invention, what we mean is the discovery or the observing of available arguments in a given case. It is one of the 5 offices of the orator. It's the first of the 5: invention, arrangement, style, memory, and delivery. And when we focus on invention, we're focusing on that aspect of rhetoric where The orator considers the available arguments and chooses those arguments which are most likely to secure the decision he or she is looking for. So Cicero gives us a guideline here, sort of a brainstorming process that we can use for considering any forensic case, looking at the facts in the case and matching those up against what he calls the attributes. And by doing that kind of investigation and examination, discovering or inventing the best arguments for a given case. So you will need to select a cold case to investigate. One source for finding a case is the New Hampshire Department of Justice Office of the Attorney General New Hampshire Cold Case List. This list includes the names, dates, and towns of unsolved homicides and, in a few cases, missing person cases, and provides, as if you click on the name of the victim, some basic facts in the case. That can get you started. Find a case that you might be interested in, pursue that case, do some further research, gather all the facts you can about the case, and use that as the one that you investigate. Or you can move beyond New Hampshire and look at some other famous cold cases, famous murders, missing person cases, and you can discover a variety of different lists of these famous cases on the internet. For instance, if you go to Wikipedia, you can get a list of unsolved murders of the 21st century. There's also a list for the 20th century, some notorious cases, some infamous murders that have yet to be solved. And again, the expectation is not that you'll find the answer to the case or that you've solved the case, but that you're able to gather the facts of the case and make a reasonable argument in support of a theory or hypothesis about what happened in the case using the classical forensic method of discovering forensic arguments. So once you've selected a case, then you can do further research using library databases and other internet sources. For example, this source here, Nexus Uni, used to be called LexisNexis, but it is a database that allows you to search criminal records and both legal records and newspaper accounts related to criminal justice cases. You can look at newspaper databases such as the Boston Globe. There's both a Boston Globe Current and a Boston Globe Historical database. You could search for information, stories about both New Hampshire or other national cases that might appear in the Boston Globe or the New York Times or the Los Angeles Times or the Washington Post. All of those newspapers have their own databases. If we happen to be on campus and you're able to get into the library also has an excellent collection of microforms for local newspapers like the Manchester Union Leader, the Nashua Telegraph, the Foster's Daily Democrat, the Concord Monitor, and other local papers that could help you research those New Hampshire cases. But the point of doing the research is to search through as many stories as you can find and gather all of the separate bits and pieces of evidence that are related to the particular case you are interested in. And then once you've gathered that evidence, you can begin to look through it and determine, all right, which are the attributes of Roman forensic invention that allow me to make the best argument in favor of the hypothesis that I want to advance, right? So you're researching the case, you're finding newspaper stories, you're finding maybe some legal documents related to the case. WMUR-TV in New Hampshire has done a whole series of short videos on New Hampshire cold cases. You could look on their website as well. So gather as much information as you can for that opening section where you're going to introduce the key and relevant facts in the case. And then we're going to turn to that Roman system of classical forensic invention. And the book we'll be reading, Cicero de Inventioni, reviews that investigation of a case by dividing each case into a series of what Cicero calls attributes. There are attributes of the person and attributes of the action. So with regard to attributes of the person, these could refer either to the victim of the crime or to the likely perpetrator of the crime. And so we would investigate, for instance, the nature of the person. By this we mean things related to the person's natural attributes. Were they male or female? Were they black or white? Were they old or young? Were they physically strong or sick and weak, right? These would all be attributes related to their nature. And the manner of life, that is, how did they live their life? Where did they work? Were they part of a family? What was the nature of the work that they did? What kinds of things did they do for recreation? Right? And you would be exploring all of these facts and considering them as they relate to each of the key persons or people involved in the case. You can also investigate things like their habits, their feelings, things that they had an interest in, not just that they were interested in, but things, for instance, if they owned part of a business, they would have an interest in the business, right? Things that they had accomplished, things that we know they had said before, right? All of these can be bits of information, pieces of evidence that you can include in your analysis. And then the same with regard to the action, that is the crime that you're investigating. We would consider, as Cicero explains, the place where the act took place, right? Not only the place, but how far it was from other relevant places. So if a person was found murdered somewhere or a body was dumped somewhere, how far away from where they worked or where they lived would that place be? Then regarding time, so for instance, not just what time of day, although that's relevant, of course, was it night or day, what hour of the night, what hour of the day, right? But what time of year, what was going on in the community at that time, right? And then other things like occasion, like what aspect of the murder might reveal the occasion for committing the crime, or the manner in which it was committed. Was it done in a violent manner? Was it done secretly? Facilities would refer to the tools with which the crime was committed, the murder weapon, a getaway car, all of those kinds of things, right? When we think of things like similarity and genus and species, we're thinking about how that crime relates to other crimes that we know about, right? So was this part of a serial murder? So did it have similarities to other crimes? Or was it a murder of a certain species? That is, we know that, for instance, strangulation is a species of homicide, right? So how does that relate to the facts in the given case that you're investigating? And you get a better idea how to do this if you look closely at Cicero's On Invention, right? And this is the assigned reading related to this assignment. But you'll see here in this portion of Cicero that I've included on the slide here, just where he takes up his brief discussion of manner of life, fortune, and habit as attributes of the person, right? So read through Cicero, think about each of those attributes. The purpose is not to use every single one of them, but to select from among the various attributes those that seem to give you some insight into the crime, or those that enable you to make an argument that it's more or less likely that a particular person committed the crime, or a particular type of person committed the crime, right? What are the attributes that allow you to make a probability argument in support of your hypothesis? And you can also consider Aristotle's forensic topics. So if you recall from Propaganda and Persuasion and reading Aristotle's Rhetoric, forensic rhetoric is one of the classical genres, as we explained, right? But Aristotle gives us a different approach for discovering the available means of persuasion, that is, for discovering arguments in a forensic case. We could, for instance, consider the various incentives to do wrong. So review what Aristotle has to say about the different incentives. What are all the different reasons why people commit acts of wrongdoing? And then how can we talk about those in terms of whether they relate to the reasoning or deliberation, that is, or habit, or anger, or appetite. Then Aristotle gives us various topics to consider that are related to the victims of crimes, or that we can think about all the different things that go on in the mind of criminals when they're committing an act like this, right? What are the state of mind of criminals? And then what are the different types of wrongdoing? Right? How would we place this particular act in a category by defining it as a certain type of wrongdoing? Was it a violation of particular law or general law? Was it an offense against an individual or an offense against the community? And what are the different arguments that we can make in relation to each of these available topics for forensic rhetoric as discussed in Aristotle's Rhetoric? And again, the point of looking at Aristotle and Cicero is to give you a sort of a method of brainstorming about the facts in the case, to think about particular elements of the case, and then to draw out from the facts in the case the facts that enable you to make a strong argument in favor of your hypothesis. Again, the point is not to solve the case, but to be able to make a reasonable proposition or a reasonable proposal about what is likely to have happened in the case, right? What is your hypothesis or theory about the case, and what are the arguments that lead you to that conclusion? That's what the point of doing the assignment is. So you think about the case in terms of these attributes or in terms of Aristotle's topics and discover the best arguments. Again, you can review all of the attributes, but you don't have to use them all. You're using the ones that enable you to make the best arguments in support of your case, right? You're proposing a particular hypothesis or a speculative theory about what you think happened in the case, and the arguments that you advance are meant to be in support of that theory. So choose the arguments that best enable you to support the hypothesis that you advance. So when you're supporting your hypothesis, you're using the arguments you've generated. You offer the reasons for coming to the conclusion that you have advanced. What are the arguments that support your speculative conclusion? What are the reasons your hypothesis makes sense and would make sense to anybody listening or reading your hypothesis? Is your conclusion reasonable? We have to be able to look at your argument. It doesn't have to solve the case. We don't have to be certain. But would anybody reading your argument draw the conclusion, yes, that's a reasonable conclusion about what likely happened in this particular case?